You gonna? So Nicola, are we live now, are we?
We are, yes, Dan.
Are we good to go? Do we have our speakers, our guests in?
Yes, so numbers are creeping up nicely. So
you want to give me a nod when you think we've reached our number then, Nicola, please?
Yeah, I reckon you're good to go, Dan.
Okay, lovely. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us. This is our third in this series of breakfast webinars. So today we've got speakers from each nation to talk about a united approach, an early morning briefing on post-Brexit approaches in the 4 UK nations is its title. So what I'd like to do is go straight on to Janet Hughes this morning. Janet is going to provide an overview of policy changes in England relating to agricultural transition plan, ELMS, SFI, pathway and future farming schemes. So I'll go straight over to Janet. Thank you, Janet.
Thank you very much, Dan. Morning, everybody. My name's Janet Hughes. I'm the Programme Director for the Future Farming and Countryside Programme here in Defra. And the scope of our programme, as you'll know, is, I'm just setting my timer so that I don't speak for too long. The scope of our programme is England. And what we're going to be doing in England is, over the next 7 years, we're going to be phasing out direct payments, and all of the money that would have been spent on direct payments is going to be instead spent on paying farmers to produce public goods and helping farmers to become more profitable and productive. So there are 2 aims for our programme. The first one is to ensure that we have a vibrant, competitive agriculture sector in England over that whole period and afterwards. And the second is to get much better environmental and climate change outcomes from that sector and from the countryside. And we always are pursuing those 2 aims together, and we believe that you can't have one without the other in the long term. You can't continue to have a profitable sector unless you take care of the soil and the natural environment that it relies on, and you can't have looking after the environment and looking after climate change unless you have a profitable sector. So we need to pursue both of those aims at the same time. And there's a range of things we're going to be doing over the next 7 years. First of all, we're going to be looking after everybody who's already in an agri-environment scheme of some sort, whether that's countryside stewardship or HLS, and making sure that all of those people have a really smooth, clear, satisfactory journey between now and the new schemes that we're introducing. Because if we don't look after all of those people, then they won't be going into our new schemes, and nobody else will either, because they'll see what happens. So that's the first thing we're doing. And we're going to be improving those schemes, and we're starting with that. We're going to be announcing next week, actually, the countryside stewardship scheme for 2022, which will be a simplified scheme, responding to lots of the feedback that we have from farmers about how those schemes work. So that's looking after existing schemes. At the same time, we're going to be building environmental land management, the new way to pay farmers to produce public goods. And there'll be 3 components to that. The sustainable farming incentive. And the idea of that is that there's something in there for everyone. It's a quite straightforward scheme to enroll in. It's got actions in it which are widely applicable across a range of farm settings. And it's basically helping farmers to do the right thing, both for them, for their farm and for their environment. And the second component is local nature recovery. And that's where we're going to be encouraging people to collaborate and set local priorities and then collectively agree to do things to pursue those priorities. So yesterday, for example, I was talking to somebody in a catchment area where they were particularly concerned about phosphate reduction, and that would be one of the local priorities they might set in their area, but in different areas there would be other priorities instead. And the third is landscape recovery, and that's for landscape scale land use change or recovery type projects like wetland restoration, peatland restoration, forestry, woodland creation, those sorts of projects, and including rewilding for those who are particularly interested in that. And I know that's a very divisive term, but there has to be room in this whole scheme for all of the different types of intervention that people might want to make, from just on-farm, nature-friendly actions, right up the scale, all the way to landscape recovery. And that's environmental land management, and we're going to start piloting the first elements of that this year through the Sustainable Farming Incentive pilot, and then the Sustainable Farming Incentive core elements of that will start to be rolled out from March next year. So we'll start to make actions available and start paying people through that scheme from next year, and then we will gradually, incrementally add more things in and improve the scheme over the following years so that the full environmental land management scheme is available from 2024 onwards. So that's the kind of flagship element of the policy. And then on the kind of second side of the policy is on prosperity support, where we want to support farmers to become more productive, more efficient in a sustainable way. So to support that, we're going to be supporting farmers to invest in slurry management, where we know there's large scale non-compliance, there's a market failure in the form of non-compliance with slurry requirements. And we're going to support farmers to go beyond the requirements in order to look after slurry more safely and efficiently on their farm. We're going to be launching a farming investment fund later this year, which will support farmers to buy kit and equipment from small scale to much larger scale to help them to become more productive and more sustainable. We're going to be supporting innovation, research and development, new entrants, learning and development, and a range of other things, all to support productivity and prosperity in the sector. And then the third element of this set of reforms is around regulation and enforcement. And we know that the way that we currently enforce the rules that everyone has to comply with around farming to protect the environment and to protect animal welfare is not seen as widely effective. People regard it as very complicated. Lots of the time people don't even know what the rules are they're supposed to comply with, and that's not surprising because it's not very clear. And when they do know what the rules are, the enforcement is not seen as effective, and we're seen as disproportionately enforcing minor breaches and not enforcing enough major breaches. So we're looking both in the short term at how we can improve the way we do regulation and enforcement, and that includes making some improvements to cross compliance as of this year, where we'll be making more use of warning letters for minor breaches and trying to target our efforts on more significant breaches where there's genuine harm being caused. But also we're looking at what does the future for regulation and enforcement look like in a world where we don't have cross compliance because we're not making direct payments through basic payments anymore. And for that, we're undertaking some quite detailed co-design activities, and we really encourage farmers to get involved in that. So if regulation and enforcement gets your goat or your sheep, then get in touch with me afterwards, and we'd love to get you involved in helping us design a better future on that front. And in doing all of that, we've committed to a number of principles about how we're going to do these reforms, learning from the past. I'm new to this sector. I joined in this program in June last year, and I've really enjoyed immersing myself in the sector and talking to lots of farmers since I joined last year. And I've also been studying the mistakes and lessons of the past. And as a result of that, we have committed to a number of principles to make sure that we don't fail this time round. And I know that lots of farmers will remember the previous failures and be wondering how on earth are these promises I'm making going to work this time round when they haven't before. And I'll tell you why. Because first of all, we're co-designing what we're doing with farmers. So on environmental land management, we've got 3,000 farmers working with us to help us work out what that scheme should look like, and we welcome more getting involved. And that means we're designing things with farmers and with others who are interested, not doing it in Whitehall and then unleashing it on you and hoping for the best, which is what we might have done in the past, but around the whole of government, actually, not just in Defra. The second thing is we want to create a shift where what we're doing is we're here to help people do the right things for their businesses and for the environment. So we're not here to get in the way, we're not here to nitpick, we're not here to turn up with tape measures at dawn and criticize what you're doing, which is perfectly well intended, and achieving the right outcomes. We're here to help, and we want you to see us like you see your vet, a professional that wants you to succeed and is here to help you do so, not a kind of nitpicking bureaucrat. And that's a culture shift that we need to bring around in our organisation, and we recognise that and are working on it. And related to that, we know we need to earn your trust in what we're doing, and we will go out of our way to do things that help you to show you that you can trust us. And that includes making some improvements from now on to the way things work, responding to the feedback that we get from farmers about how things work right now, including about how we administer schemes, making payments on time, making decisions on time, dealing with queries on time. All of those things we're working on improving to build your trust in us, and also to show our trust in you as people who know how to farm their land and don't need us to tell you how to do it. And then there's some principles about how we're going to implement our new services, which include we're going to make them as clear and simple as possible. We don't think it's right that you should have to pay people to fill in our forms for you just because they're so complicated, and it's so worrying that you might get it wrong because we've made them so complicated. And we want to simplify things and make it clearer and easier for you to deal with. And we want to make things fair and reasonable. And we know that a lot of what we do now is not seen as fair and reasonable, and that we need to make improvements in that way, both in the way we run schemes and also the way we do regulation and enforcement. And then we need to make things work for the people who use them. That should go without saying, shouldn't it? But unfortunately in government, we're not always brilliant at making things work for the people who use them. And that comes back to the point about working in partnership with farmers. So if there's anyone here today who would be up for helping us test out early versions of our guidance or our services, please get in touch with me. I'm janet.hughes@defra.gov.uk, and you're welcome to get in touch, either if you want to get involved or if you've got questions that you don't get time to ask today, then get in touch, and I'm always happy to help. And then finally, we're going to learn and adapt as we go. And that means that we're not going to set out every single detail at the beginning and then stick to it rigidly come what may. We know that farmers really need detail about what we're going to pay for and how much and what options are going to be available to them. And we're working really hard to provide that this year. But what we're not going to do is nail it all down and carve it in stone and say, right, that's it, we won't adjust, because over the next 7 years, things will change in the farming sector, in the technology sector, in the way that people do farming, in the wider markets, and we need to be able to adapt to that. So that we're trying to approach what we do in a way that is incremental, gradual, and allows us to learn and adapt as we go. So you will see us changing our plans, you'll see us changing our minds a bit, you'll see us listening to feedback and adjusting our course as we go. And all of that is because that's how we think we need to operate in order to be successful in the long term. So that's what we're going to be doing. I am very excited to be in my role. I think I've got the best job in government. I'm thoroughly enjoying it, and really particularly enjoying talking to farmers and learning about what you're concerned about and what you're hoping for and what it's going to take for us to be successful in this programme. So I look forward to your questions today. But as I say, if you don't get a chance to ask a question or you don't like to do so in a big group, then feel free to email me and I will be very happy to keep in touch. Thanks.
Janet, thank you very much. That's excellent. I think we're used to changing our plans and minds, and we call it flexibility. So you could go with that, but thank you very much. So if I could introduce our second speaker, who is Ian Stevenson. He's going to provide an overview of policy changes in Northern Ireland, plans for the future of agricultural schemes and transitional arrangements. So over to you, Ian. Thank you.
Morning, thank you, Dan, and good morning, everybody. I'll probably take a slightly different approach from my presentation. I'm going to try and share a short presentation to go through with you, but hopefully won't take any more than about 10 minutes. So hopefully if the technology works okay. I shall. Hopefully you can see that okay, everybody.
What's up with me?
Oh, I'm just trying to get this to come up on a full screen. Oh, it's not coming up. Hold on a second. Trying to get rid of this. Hold on.
Ian, if you go to the arrow in the top left that's pointing left and click on that,
okay, yeah, sorry. And
then go across the top to slideshow.
I know, I'm trying to get rid of the toolbar at the top here.
Oh, I see. Oh, you go, in that case, go along to the very right-hand side. You got it?
Got it now. Got it now?
That's it, Ian.
Perfect. Okay, we have overcome the technology. So again, good morning, everybody, and so thank you for asking me to speak to you this morning. So I'll give you a very quick overview of what we're thinking about here in Northern Ireland in terms of our future agriculture policy. Certainly I'm not speaking, I suppose, on behalf of the government. I work for the Livestock and Meat Commission, the red meat levy body over here. So just give you a perspective from industry and what government's thinking as well. So really just a few introductory slides just in terms of what the shape of our industry currently looks like at the moment. So really, I guess we have had a gradual contraction in our sheep industry for a number of years, which is sort of stabilised now at the moment. We've got about 930,000 breeding ewes in Northern Ireland. And if you actually compare that to where we have come from, I guess we're about 500,000 head in the breeding ewe population, lower than we were back in the late 1990s. I guess that's a trend that's probably been reflected across most of the UK regions. And I suppose naturally enough, we would have seen a growth in our sheep populations following EEC membership, with heritage payments and growth in exports. But since, I suppose, largely since decoupling, I guess we've seen a gradual decline in our sheep populations, and also the relative profitability of the sector. And certainly when you speak to farmers, there are those that enjoy working with sheep and those that don't. So there's a natural hassle factor there, as people refer to, in terms of farming with sheep. So, but we've been fairly steady in terms of our numbers over the last sort of 10 years, and certainly our future policy, I guess, is designed around looking to try and stabilise numbers and maintain a productive agricultural sector. So, but I'll come on to that later. Just in terms of current market situation, you know, you're all very aware, just in terms of the situation we're in at the moment. Here from a Northern Irish perspective, we started off this year very strong. Our latest deadweight price report for the sheep sector was just over 552 pence per kilo, which is certainly a very robust start to the year. It started to ease back a bit over the last week. You know, the current factory quotes are in and around 500 to 530 pence per kilo, but certainly have a very strong start to the year. And probably one of the things that I suppose we're slightly unique here in Northern Ireland, I suppose a lot of our live animals, and certainly in the sheep sector, are exported to the Republic of Ireland for direct slaughter. Last year, about 41% of our total lamb output was exported from Northern Ireland to the Republic of Ireland for direct slaughter, which was slightly back on previous year levels. And we've seen that locally in terms of our kill was slightly up here by about 15% in the Northern Irish plants, which is certainly a trend. Certainly our industry has been keen to slaughter more sheep locally, and certainly it would be an interesting trend in the years ahead. In terms of where we compare with other regions, you know, there's a lot of information in this slide, but probably the trend, I suppose, that's probably most noticeable in terms of our sheep price tends to quite closely mirror that in the Republic of Ireland, given the all-island nature of the sheep trade. So whenever you see, you know, sheep moving across the border, you tend to find our prices tend to be quite sort of similar to the Republic of Ireland, given, you know, we have buyers from the south that come up and buy quite a lot of sheep up here. So if there's much difference in price, you see quite a number of sheep movements across the border. So I think there's been a fairly steady sort of reflection of our sheep price with that in the Republic of Ireland, and certainly I expect that to continue. So really just in terms of the final introductory slide, just to put that in a sort of a graphical format, if you see in terms of, we slaughtered about 830,000 sheep in Northern Ireland, or produced about 830,000 sheep for slaughter in Northern Ireland last year. About 470,000 of those were killed in Northern Irish plants, and about 360,000 were exported live. And if you take the combined output of both of those avenues for slaughter, you can see about 25% of our lamb ends up in the UK market and about 75% in the EU market. So that's either going directly from Northern Irish plants or indirectly via the Republic of Ireland plants. So hence I suppose the key concern there was before the UK's exit from the European Union in terms of what future trade was going to look like. Obviously Northern Ireland's in a slightly different situation than the rest of the UK with the protocol on Ireland and Northern Ireland, and certainly I'm sure if you've seen the news over the last few days, you'll be quite familiar with some of the issues around the protocol and how that operates. But I guess one of the benefits, it certainly gives us unfettered access to both the UK and the EU market for our product. So, you know, again, that is a unique situation from a Northern Irish perspective. So in terms of policy changes then, really, we've been in the situation for quite a number of years where we didn't actually have an executive of ministers in Northern Ireland. We had 3 years from 2017 where we had no Northern Ireland Assembly or executive. That was restored in January last year, and certainly, you know, we have a very strong advocate for our agriculture industry and Minister Edwin Pitts, who was appointed as Agriculture Minister in January last year. And certainly a couple of the quick decisions he took last year when he was in post was really to, I suppose, try and reallocate the budget that was there for the basic payment entitlements to make sure that the budget matched with the entitlements that were going to farmers. So he actually applied an increase last year to really make sure that the direct payments matched the budget allocation, and that resulted in an extra £8 million or a 4.3% increase in the basic entitlements to farmers last year. And the other, I suppose, thing that he did last year was to make sure that direct payments were made in full to farmers. You know, so from October last year, over 99% of farmers received their full single farm payment by mid-December. So again, you know, we can see the benefit of having a minister in place. In terms of transition in this year, 2021, again, you know, they're mostly technical adjustments this year. The minister, I suppose, took a decision that greening requirements, you know, as part of the direct payments to farmers weren't really working that well in Northern Ireland, given the small arable acreage that we have here in terms of the outcomes that greening envisaged in terms of the crop diversification and ecological focus areas, is decided to discontinue that for the current year. And basically the greening payments will be incorporated into the basic payment scheme entitlement values this year. So effectively, that means a 43% increase. So the overall payments stay the same, but effectively the greening element has been just incorporated into the basic payment for the current year. So moving forward, as I said, we had no government effectively in the period, I suppose, post the Brexit referendum up until 2020. We effectively had the Department of Agriculture, but there was no ministers in post. So the ministers, in the absence of ministers in 2018, the Department of Agriculture carried out a stakeholder engagement exercise with industry to see what was the long-term vision for the agricultural industry here in terms of agricultural policy. So there's really 4 broad outcomes that were identified as part of that process of stakeholder engagement. One really was focused around productivity, and that's one of the key aspects of our policy outcome going forward, that we have an industry really that pursues increased productivity in international terms, that is, I guess, provides a profitable sector to help grow market share going forward. So productivity is one of the key pillars. The second key pillar really is resilience and resilience to external shocks. So whether that's market and currency volatility or extreme weather events, and certainly, we've certainly had major shocks to our marketplace over the last year with COVID-19, but certainly resilience is one of the key aspects in terms of an outcome. The other one, and a particularly important one, is really an industry that is environmentally sustainable. So, looking at its impact of air and water quality, soil health, carbon footprint, and biodiversity. So the environmental pillar is critically important. And the fourth key outcome really focuses around the supply chain. So we want an industry that operates, within an integrated supply chain, an efficient, sustainable supply chain, and that's also competitive and responsive, and that is clear transmission of market signals and focuses on high quality food to the end consumer. So those are the 4 sort of broad outcomes that the long-term vision was identified by industry. And DERA, the department over here, had a trade and agriculture committee which comprised industry representatives, environmental representatives, and other sectors, really to try and come up with a plan. So that sort of set the scene. Moving forward, we as LMC actually undertook last year to do quite a piece of work with our farming and processing stakeholders in Northern Ireland to get their thoughts as to, now we know what those sort of broad outcomes are like, what would that actually look like in practice on the ground? So I think from a beef and lamb industry perspective, which is where we're, I suppose, representing as an organisation or funded by an organisation, I think our stakeholders are very keen to see, I suppose, a core component, or probably the principal component of the new agricultural payment being an environment and productivity support payment, which effectively would be your basic resilience, your basic income support payment would provide that level of resilience. But it's not just a payment for having an acre of land or a hectare of land, it's a payment to, that would be linked to a series of compulsory and optional key performance indicators. So whether that's around space like greenhouse gas auditing, soil sampling and nutrient management, certainly activity is important to our industry. So whether there be minimum stocking rates, and indeed certainly an element of knowledge and technology transfer that farmers would be required to undertake a certain amount of CPD as part of that, certainly maybe as one of the optional key performance indicators. But that would be the principal component, certainly, that our industry would favour for a new scheme going forward, and certainly there'll be a discussion to be had how much of the pot goes into that basic foundation payment. But then on top of that, that'll be the basic, I suppose, element that everybody will have to attain before they can move on to top up that with a what we're calling enhanced environmental and productivity outcomes. So there is a strong desire in Northern Ireland, certainly, for coupled payments, and those should be linked to beef calves and breeding ewes to promote efficiency, sustainability, animal welfare, and quality. So, where the suckler cow and breeding ewe sector is particularly important to the Northern Ireland economy, and there's a strong desire within industry to make sure that both of those sectors are sustained going forward, and we see coupled payments as being one of the key elements in that. So those payments, as I say, there's a number of ideas that have been suggested by industry as to how those might be rolled out, and we can explore that later. But certainly the areas of efficiency, sustainability, welfare, and quality are the four sort of broad strands of direction that we see for those coupled payments. We also, as an industry, would like to see a successor scheme for the environmental farming scheme that we have here in Northern Ireland. And also, given the nature of our land types and particularly where our suckler cows and breeding ewes are based in our areas of natural constraint, there's a strong desire to see a follow-up, what we're terming a rural disadvantaged area scheme, to replace the old payment schemes that were there for those disadvantaged areas. And also, the third pillar of any new agricultural policy framework also needs to include a rural development chapter that would include, support for capital grants on farms and succession planning, which is a big issue for our industry over here, given the age profile of our industry and the types of land tenure arrangements that we have here. And really, so what's some of the key issues? From a government perspective, I know the Northern Ireland, Scottish and Welsh government certainly have been having quite a strong discussion with Treasury around the budget allocation for each of the regions, and I know there's been some debate around that, but certainly any new policy hinges on having an appropriate budget allocation. Probably one of the key issues for industry as to what future UK trade policy is going to look like in terms of deals with international countries and what impact that may have on domestic agricultural production in the UK. So it's a key consideration, certainly, in terms of what future agricultural policy might look like and the level of support that might be needed in terms of offsetting any issues arising from the trade policy side. But also from a Northern Irish perspective, we have to look at our cross-border competitiveness with the Republic of Ireland, because we see a lot of money going into supporting, which is a primary industry in the Republic of Ireland. So there's been a huge number of schemes to support, whether it's genetics or productivity improvement in the Republic, and certainly is a key issue in terms of maintaining that, I suppose, competitive position with the Republic. In the absence of a minister, certainly, on today's discussion, certainly our minister, Edwin Pitts, has certainly made quite a number of public statements recently to suggest that he's very keen to join up the environmental ambitions of our industry with the economic activity. So it's not one or the other, it's both. And certainly from his perspective, he's been leading on a green growth strategy in Northern Ireland, which is right across government departments, and certainly we want our agricultural policy to link up with that. And finally, really, then, our minister has said that he's very keen to engage with industry. He wants ideas to come from the industry up rather than from the top down, and certainly wants to develop a new policy this year. And from his perspective, he certainly has indicated publicly his strong desire to support suckler cows and breeding ewes, and certainly has mentioned coupled payments quite often as part of that. So I think the minister's thinking is very much aligned with the industry's thinking at this stage. And there'll be a lot of discussion this year to develop a new policy. So really, my final slide then, as I've said, our future certainly will have many challenges, and certainly we've just come out of veganuary, as it's been termed, but we certainly have the changing cultural narrative, towards meat, and I guess the whole issue of climate change is a key issue certainly for here in Northern Ireland as well, given the intensity of livestock production we have over here in our grass-based systems. And also things like antimicrobial resistance certainly isn't, it's a key issue for our industry, and we all know the implications of Brexit at this stage. But I think certainly as an industry, I think we can rise to the challenge. So, Chairman, that's a very broad overview from my perspective from Northern Ireland.
Ian, thank you very much indeed for that. Fantastic. I didn't mention at the start that your involvement there as Chief Executive of the Livestock Marketing Commission, the MLC, but I think you did. Thank you. So thank you very much, Ian. So over to John Kerr from Scotland, Deputy Director of Agriculture Policy Division for Scottish Government, representing Scotland. And John, to provide an overview of policy changes in Scotland relating to plans for future agricultural schemes and transitional arrangements. So over to you, John. Thank you.
Thanks, Dan, and good morning, everybody. It's a bit disconcerting because I can only see the speakers, but I'm assuming there's hundreds of you out there. So it's very good to be with you this morning. And it's really nice to be able to have this discussion with the other representatives of the other administrations as well. I look forward to the questions later on. So I guess first thing to say that it's been a very difficult year, this last year, and in a very real sense, the work that I've been doing in government over the last year has mirrored the issues that agriculture has faced, and in particular the sheep sector. So in particular, the twin issues of the COVID pandemic, which affected us all, of course, and the specific threat of Brexit, which many of us, including Scottish officials, could see as having a very real and damaging impact on the sheep sector. So both COVID and Brexit are specifically being ready for the end of the transition period have dominated the work that we've been doing. And I'm sure they've dominated the thoughts of many of you that are here this morning too. So we managed to keep agriculture running throughout the pandemic, and I'm personally very grateful to those in the industry who made that possible. From livestock markets through to hauliers and feed companies, right down to the individuals who not only followed the guidance, but many of you often helped to ensure that that guidance that we put together was right in the first place. So I and my team are really very appreciative of the joint working that went into this, and it's still going on actually. So my thanks to you. And similarly, I know that my colleagues in the food and drink sector have worked tirelessly on the production and retail side to ensure that that was also true at the consumer end of the supply chain. And I guess probably Ian knows a bit about that as well. In Scotland, Mr. Ewing was very hands-on in that effort. So perhaps as a starting point to discussion on future policy, from a Scottish perspective, it's useful to take stock of where we are now here early in 2021. And I would like to just single out two things really. So the most significant change is that we're outside the EU. And as a Scottish official, I guess I'm bound to remind you all, although I'm sure it takes no reminding, that that was against the will of most Scots and against the wishes of our government, but nevertheless, here we are. The second major change in Scotland is the passing into law of our climate change targets to get to net zero in Scotland by 2045. So these targets will require wholesale change across the whole economy over the years to 2045, with much of that effort required in the early part of the emissions reduction journey. So if I take Brexit first then, and I'll touch maybe on a couple of things that Ian also mentioned. Even though the UK government managed to secure a deal at the last minute, there is still a huge number of issues in relation to exports. Thankfully, the disruption that we've seen to the seafood sector has been avoided for the trade in agricultural goods, at least so far. But we do know that some exporters have waited a while before starting to pick up volumes, and it's now that those volumes are picking up that we might expect to see a bit more disruption, but perhaps that will be avoided, and let's hope so. We do know, however, that some of the live exports of sheep for breeding to Northern Ireland is now permanently subjected to new animal health restrictions, which in effect closes that trade for most of those involved, and that's got particular impact on the blackface flock, as I'm sure some of you will know all too well. But setting aside the immediate border issues, leaving the European Union also means leaving the CAP agricultural support regime, and this gives policymakers across the UK more flexibility to design and implement support systems tailored to our countries. And Janet described that process for England, so I'll touch on it for Scotland. But the other issue is that, and Ian alluded to this a moment ago, that flexibility also comes with a need to justify the support in financial terms to UK taxpayers, and that's done through the lenses of our finance ministers in the devolved administrations, but also Treasury. And that's not a theoretical issue. As Ian mentioned, we already know that there's a shortfall from Scotland's perspective of what we would have expected to receive in terms of agricultural support budget. And in Scotland, that's to the tune of 170 million over the years to 2025. And we know that the other administrations have similar issues. In Scotland, early in the Brexit process, we set out a period of stability and simplicity, during which time farmers and crofters in Scotland could depend on the current CAP support to apply, with the EU law being retained into UK law. That process was progressed successfully, and I have to say there was considerable joint working across the devolved administration, so credit to our colleagues in Defra and the other territories for the joint working that went into that. But in Scotland, it also included passing new primary legislation to provide powers to pay the cap on an ongoing basis. That legislation also allows for simplification and improvements to be made. However, the Act has a fixed end point, so which is the end of the next Scottish Parliament. So that means that during the next Parliament, we will have to bring forward a bill to set out how rural support will be provided beyond 2026. So there's a real opportunity for engagement in that bill process as we design our new policy approach. So in that sense, our approach in Scotland is quite different to the position in the other nations. In particular, Mr. Ewing has set out his ongoing commitment to provide support to food producers through the Basic Payments Scheme. And he set that out very pointedly, I think, and deliberately so at the Oxford Farming Conference. It made clear his belief that our farmers and crofters contribute to the value to the country in three main ways, which is firstly by providing high quality food, secondly by being custodians of the countryside, and thirdly by forming the backbone of our rural communities. So in Scotland, our approach to agriculture and rural Scotland is seen in this context. But that also brings me to the second of my two main points, which is the twin challenge of climate change and biodiversity loss. In Scotland, we've set binding legal targets which apply annually from now until 2045, when we reach net zero. And we've also set a clear commitment to improving our biodiversity. Both of these present challenges and opportunities for agriculture and those working and managing our land. So the period of stability and simplicity to 2024 quite deliberately gives us space and time we need to design and develop new approaches that reflect the need for change and for agriculture to play its part in cutting greenhouse gas emissions and also to restore and protect nature. So as I mentioned earlier, the targets set into law in the Scottish Parliament though this also applies to the rest of the UK in terms of the Paris Accord, they'll be challenging across the whole economy. And we set out what that means for each sector of the economy in the recent climate change plan, or it's a climate change plan update actually. And for agriculture, this means a reduction of emissions of around a third by 2032. So I'd say two quick things about that third. It doesn't maybe sound like, well, it's a lot. So it's at the border of what's technically achievable in terms of the current output, but it's also a lot less than is being asked of many other parts of the economy. And I think as an industry, we have to be very mindful that our total share of the emissions is going to go up as other sectors cut more quickly. So that's something to keep in mind. Now, I know that those of you living and working in the more marginal land will have an interest beyond your sheep enterprises. And one of the features of tackling climate change is the need for land use change to help sequester and store carbon. This will present new opportunities. Two key examples of this are woodland creation and peatland restoration. Scotland has the most ambitious tree planting in any part of the UK, and importantly, we are starting to meet those targets. Our plan is to plant around 12,000 hectares, or around 25 million trees a year, rising to 18,000 hectares by 2025. In addition, Scotland has large areas of peatland, much of which is in need of restoration. Over the next 10 years, Scotland has already committed around £250 million to peatland restoration. And this upfront commitment should give confidence to businesses involved in this work to invest for the long term, bringing secure jobs to our remote areas and indeed the communities that you live in. So in order to bring these threads of ongoing support for food production whilst tackling climate change and accommodating land use change, Mr. Ewing has put in place a series of farmer-led groups to advise how each sector of the Scottish agriculture can rise to these challenges. In particular, how can farmers and crofters reduce emissions and improve biodiversity on farms and crofts, and specifically how our support schemes can be modified to support them in meeting these goals. This work is furthest ahead in the Scottish suckler beef sector, and the suckler beef report, the first one, has been published, and a programme board has been set up to turn those recommendations into a reality. This approach is being applied to the other sectors in Scotland, and just before Christmas, the Hill, Upland and Crofting Group was announced, which will be jointly chaired by Joyce Campbell and Martin Kennedy. The group, like the Suckler Beef one, is made up of members drawn from farming and crofting communities. And the Hill and Upland Group has been asked to cover the sheep sector, as well as to make recommendations for the future of the Less Favoured Area Support Scheme. You'll be pleased to know that Jen Craig has kindly agreed to be a member of the group, so you can be confident that the sheep sector's interests will be well represented. The focus will be on how to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, covering the Hill and Upland, sheep, beef and crofting sectors, and making environmental improvements from farming and crofting in high nature value areas of Scotland. To complete the picture, arable, dairy and pigmeat groups have also been set up, and they've all been asked to report in spring, so they're working at pace. It will be for the groups to recommend the specific actions to be taken for each sector, but Mr. Ewing has been clear that what is envisaged is continuing support for farmers and crofters in their role as food producers, but that public support will be contingent on meeting much more rigorous environmental standards. So I hope this gives you a sense of where we are with our policy approach in Scotland, and I'm happy to cover any points that you might want to raise with me. I look forward to the discussion. So thanks very much for your attention.
John, thank you very much indeed. Brilliant. So we're going to move on to our last speaker before we get to the questions. So our fourth speaker is James Owen, Deputy Director, Land Management Reform Division of Welsh Government, representing Wales. And James will be speaking to provide an overview of policy changes in Wales relating to sustainable farming scheme, transitional funding and future support schemes for farmers, and will also focus on the recently published Agriculture in Wales white paper. So over to you, James. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. Bonadar, everyone. Good morning from Wales. Great to be able to join you this morning, so thank you for the invitation. I do have some slides, but I think actually I'm just going to talk for a few minutes because I'm really keen that we have an opportunity for questions of everybody on the call. I've seen a few come in, which I think are all really interesting for us as governments of the nations to address. So as you said, I think probably what I'll focus on today is the policy proposals that we published before Christmas for the biggest change to agriculture in Wales in decades. We published a white paper on the 16th of December. It's our third consultation in the last 3 years, which set out really the direction of travel that we believe we should be following in Wales. It's underpinned by an existing legislative framework in Wales around wellbeing of future generations and Environment Acts. And of course, the white paper is set in the context of recent events. I think we obviously view leaving the EU as an opportunity in terms of agricultural policy. We believe that to have a sustainable and productive and resilient agriculture sector in the future, we as government have a critical role in shaping and changing the support mechanisms that are available. And I think in that sense, we think of support as, in a very holistic way, both financial support, revenue and capital, but also the advice and guidance, knowledge transfer and information that we as government can share with the industry. And I think EU exit really does provide us with an opportunity to have a made in Wales policy which is fit for future generations of farmers and current generations of farmers in Wales. I think also it's really important in the EU context, to think about the future trade arrangements that might be operating. And in the white paper, we set out kind of our views on that, not least the kind of increasing challenging situation that producers in Wales may face. That's been interesting in a COVID context to see how particularly production has and production prices in terms of livestock, cattle and lamb has prospered actually in Wales over the last 12 months. But we're really conscious that with a different global market that we'll now be operating in, we believe that Welsh producers will need to compete on grounds other than cost, or as well as cost, but other than that as well. And our central premise there is actually sustainability and the provenance of the food that's produced in Wales. So quality and high production standards will perhaps set us apart in the market. And we're really interested in how government can support that narrative in the future. And finally on that, we can't forget that agriculture has a critical role to play in addressing the climate and nature emergencies that we face as a country. 88% of land in Wales is under agricultural management, And so how we use that land is absolutely critical in tackling those two prescient challenges of the day, both from a climate and biodiversity perspective. So, you know, we set out in our white paper the context for our proposals. They build on the proposals that we've published in 2 rounds of previous consultation, and they're underpinned by existing Welsh legislation around how we think about the long-term future of industry sectors in Wales. So with all that in mind, we've set out 3 key objectives for future policy. You know, and right at the heart of our proposals is sustainable food production. So, you know, we want to support the industry to be productive and resilient, to continue to producing food to the high quality and standards that they already do, but in a sustainable way. And in doing so, we also wish to tackle or reverse the loss of biodiversity in Wales and tackle the climate emergency. So if we had 3 key overarching priorities for our future policy direction in Wales, those are they. But I think I'd really stress to you that sustainable food production is at the heart of our proposals. You know, we are advocating a land sharing approach where agriculture and environment go hand in hand to deliver, you know, both a secure and high standard of food production to people in the UK, that we support the industry effectively in future international markets, whilst also encouraging farmers to deliver public goods in exchange for public money. So in the white paper, we set out our proposals to bring forward primary legislation in Wales. So we propose to introduce a bill after the Senedd elections, which may occur in May, they may occur slightly later. You probably as cited on that as I may be. And really it's a framework bill because we know that a lot of this detail will need to do 2 things. It will need to be, you know, we will need to set out quite a lot of detail of how a new scheme will operate. And also we will need to maintain flexibility to kind of react and respond to challenges over the next generation. But we do see this as an opportunity to set in law in Wales, you know, 15 to 20 years of agricultural policy in terms of a legislative framework. The white paper talks about, you know, a huge range of provisions that we would propose to seek for Welsh ministers. If I was going to point you to 4 of those, I think I'd pick out sustainable land management as the first one. So our proposal is to create a system which is based on a principle of sustainable land management. And for me, that really recognises that the role of farming and agriculture in Wales has 3 key pillars that we as government want to support. We want it to be economically viable in the future to farm in Wales. We think farming can play a significant part in responding to the ecological and climate challenges we face. So from an environmental perspective, we think it's key. And also in Wales, the social cohesion and the social capital invested in our rural communities is really important to government. And we want to support those rural communities to be successful and thrive in the future, not least around the continued high usage of the Welsh language in our rural communities as well. So sustainable land management for us is all about those 3 pillars, if you like, environmental, economical and social things that we're trying to establish through this legislation. The white paper also sets out proposals for a scheme. I'm not going to major on that now, save to say that, you know, this is our 3rd consultation in 3 years. We've done a huge range of work with the industry in Wales around what that scheme might look like, not least a co-design events last year where we engaged with around 1,900 farmers in various different guises, really to set out the types of actions that we expect to be asking farmers to deliver in the future in the new scheme. So the white paper sets our proposals for that. We also talk in the white paper about our approach to changing the very complex set of regulations that currently underpin agricultural activity in Wales. So we've proposed to create a set of national minimum standards for agricultural regulation, which will really bring together the existing standards, so the existing baseline of regulation, into a much simpler and singular set of regulations in Wales. And we think this is really important because you know, we want to make sure that everyone is clear about what the legal requirements are for farming in Wales and what our expectations are. And we want to, where we possibly can, streamline and simplify those to make it really clear to the industry what's expected of them. So we set out in the white paper our approach to regulation, also our approach really to enforcement of that regulation, and how, you know, we believe government has a key role to play in advising and supporting and providing guidance to farmers to ensure that they're compliant with that. And I think from my perspective, it's really important to distinguish between our proposals for a new scheme and distinguish between the proposals for regulation. You know, regulation is something that will apply to all farmers. The scheme is something that government is looking to put in place over and above that regulatory baseline. So the white paper talks about that. And you know, a number of other provisions in the white paper, but just to say that in Wales we've taken provisions through the UK Agriculture Act to ensure continuity and stability to Welsh farmers over the next couple of years, not least in the context of our exit from the EU. But you know, as agriculture is a devolved policy area, we intend to replace those provisions in our own Welsh legislation. So you know, there's a range of provisions in there around exceptional market conditions, carcass classification, etc., that we intend to bring legislation forward in Wales around. So a significant number of provisions around that. So the consultation is out now. I'll post a link in the chat bar to our white paper proposals. You know, really, if you have time and have opportunity to comment, we'd be really grateful for that. We're looking for a wide spread of responses to that. Again, you know, this is as I mentioned, it's our third consultation in 3 years. You know, I think you know, hopefully those who've been following it will see the progression in our thought processes, along with things like the co-design sessions, because we're really keen to work with the industry to shape the future. Because I think you know, we are talking about transformational change here. It is a big change from a government perspective. You know, huge opportunity, I think, for us to work with the industry, perhaps in a different way than we have in the past. You know, very much we are going to be reliant on farmers to deliver the environmental outcomes we're seeking through our proposed scheme. So, like I talked about, provisions through the UK Agriculture Act, you know, as agriculture is in there around exceptional markets. So the consultation is out now. Really grateful for that. We're looking for people.
James, I don't know if it's
you know, we want to support farmers to do that because it, you know. Sorry, Dan.
I lost you there. I didn't know if it was everybody or just me. I apologise, but you're back now.
Oh, that's okay. That's okay. Well, I'll just wrap up briefly to say we intend to introduce. So the consultation closes on the 25th of March. We intend to introduce a bill after the Senedd elections, which we expect to be in May of this year. The likelihood being that we'd look to transition a phased transition into the new scheme from 2024. So over the next couple of years in Wales, we'll be doing more work around that co-design piece that I talked about, engaging with farmers on our proposals for the scheme, and we'll continue to develop you know, a robust evidence base that underpins it, including understanding what the economic impact will be on farm businesses in Wales as a result of our proposals. But I think with that, I'll probably wrap up there to give everyone a chance for questions. Thank you.
James, thank you very much. Thank you very much indeed. And as you say, it does give us some time for some questions. Now, I think everybody is basically saying along the same lines. It's going to be very much production with environment. But Janet, we've got a question here actually saying, have any firm commitments been given on our 4 nations collaborating on consistent data collection and sharing and on livestock health programs? The UK sheep industry functions as one and needs our nation to be working to support that. Would you like to comment on that firstly, Janet?
Yes, happy to. And I have started typing answers to the questions in the Q&A as well, just in case we don't get around to all of them, just in case that's helpful. So on that particular one, this is tricky because agriculture is devolved. So we can't sit in Defra and kind of tell anybody else what to do. It does rely on us all working together at working level. So on the livestock information programme that we're running in England through the Livestock Information Company, that's the scope of that is England. However, we are talking to our colleagues in Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland about how we can who are all developing similar systems, about how we can join up across those systems and make sure that it's kind of represents a joined up picture, because we do recognise what you say. Particularly for those farms that are located close to borders, it's particularly tricky if we don't join up in that way. So we are talking to each other about how to do that and recognise that issue.
Thank you. Does anybody have any comments? John, does that fit in with what's happening in Scotland?
Sorry, fishing for the mute button. So I think that's right. Well, first of all, we see that data will drive some of the efficiencies and improvements in performance that we're looking for. So I think that's probably a common position in all the administrations. And there's some real issues about data sharing that we need to allow trade to happen. So cattle and sheep tracing, for example, being a key part of that. And we are joint working, but we're also trying to innovate. So those two things are sometimes in tension with one another. So I think that what will emerge is a need to have some form of data standards across the sorts of things that we're trying to achieve, in particular how we measure improvement. And a couple of people have asked questions that relate to that in the chat as well, about how do we measure things. So I think there will be a requirement to standardize the way that we collate data. And also it's really important, the thing that's coming out strongly in the farmer-led groups discussion is allowing farmers and crofters to get access to their own data, and also to be able to benchmark where they are against the rest of the industry in a way that is very clear. So we need some good tools to visualize the data that we're all generating and collecting as well. And the more that we do that in a unified way, the better, I think.
Thank you. James, did you want to comment? Maybe lost you there, James. Ian.
Oh,
sorry, James. I will come back to you, James.
Yeah, no problem. So I was just going to say, I absolutely agree with my colleagues from Scotland and England. I think the other thing I'd add is that there are obviously formal mechanisms in place to discuss these matters now. So, there are common frameworks that have been agreed as a result of leaving the EU, where officials and ministers from the four nations come together on a regular basis to discuss current policy and current market conditions, but also that future policy and the alignment there. And I would hope that those groups are a success, really, ensuring that the governments of the four countries are coming together at a regular basis and sharing their future policy proposals, and thinking about the impact, particularly for things like cross-border farms, which is a significant challenge for along the Welsh and English border particularly, but also Scottish and English.
Thank you. Ian, it's only fair if you wanted to comment on that.
Oh, I think it's been pretty much covered well there already, but just one comment just in relation to data. Certainly it is a key issue for, I suppose, right across our industry in terms of helping to drive that productivity agenda. We have access to good data, and the data sets join up and are used to the best effect. And certainly there's quite a number of initiatives that we're looking at over here in Northern Ireland, just in terms of how we can link up information, whether it's from the traceability system or farm assurance or other aspects, in terms of really trying to drive forward some of the objectives of our new agricultural policy, and linking things up a bit better, because I suppose different programs and different initiatives have sort of tended to operate in their own silos up to now. So there's really an opportunity here to maybe try and join things up a bit better to deliver better outcomes.
Thank you. I'd agree that it's important for everybody that the nations do try and work together, and let's hope we can. But Janet, I'm aware you've got to go shortly, but there's a question here. Says, as BPS wanes, will the take-up of SFI help to fill the financial gap, and to what extent? Also, is the government committed to maintaining the level of support during this Parliament, and will happen beyond that as this coincides with the BPS dwindling? And what is the Labour Party's view on this? I don't know if you'd like to answer that one.
I can have a go. So obviously I can't speak for the Labour Party. There's a few different elements to this. First of all, the government has said we'll maintain the current levels of investment in agriculture for the full duration of this Parliament. I mean, that was announced in the manifesto, and then it was confirmed in the budget in the autumn and in the agricultural transition plan. So there's £2.406 billion a year to be invested. Currently 1.8 billion of that goes into direct payments. By the end of the Parliament, that will be reduced by half, and that money will instead be going into either existing schemes or environmental land management, or the productivity schemes that I mentioned. In terms of the gap in funding on SFI, so there is that sustainable farming incentive is an opportunity to earn money for producing public goods, but it isn't a straight switch for basic payments, because there will be things that you have to do to get that money, whether it's looking after your soil, looking after your grassland, looking after your hedgerows. There will be actions that you need to take. So it's not a straight switch of basic payments go out and then SFI money comes in and everything is still the same. The reason why we're having the productivity support that we're putting in place, and also the resilience program that we'll be introducing later this year to provide business planning advice to farmers, is that each farm will have to look at what is its future business model going to be without basic payments. We really hope that for most farms, sustainable farming incentive will play a part in that, but there are other things as well to do with reducing your input costs, increasing the value of what you produce, and looking at other ways to make the farm profitable in a post-basic payments environment. And that's, so if you're not sure about what to do, I can't answer that question generally, obviously, because every farm is different depending on its location, its size, the type of farming that you do, the type of preferences that you have in terms of the business that you want to operate. But we will be offering support through the resilience programme from later this year, professional advice. So if you're not sure what to do, then watch out for that. And if you want to get details of that when it comes out, then drop me an email afterwards and I'll make sure that we keep you informed.
Thank you, Janet. Thank you, Jan Ledoux, for that question also. But if I might just sneak another one in, Janet from Viv Lewis, who asks, is there space for Elms to consider a scheme for disadvantaged areas in England on the line suggested by Ian Stevenson?
We are looking at this, and we recognise that in different areas it's more or less possible to increase your profitability through agricultural production alone. We haven't worked out what the answer is yet, but we're very much looking at that issue and looking at how we can accommodate, how we can make sure that we're doing a number of things actually. Number one, the payments that we make represent a fair reward given the cost and effort involved in doing the actions in different types of farm setting and different types of location. But also, is there a case for doing anything in particular for, say, upland farmers or others in disadvantaged areas? And that's a live conversation that we're having. And if you want to get involved in that conversation, then email me afterwards and I'll put you in touch with the right people.
Janet, thank you very much. I think it's fair to say any questions we might send your way for answering, I think was discussed. That's
yes,
brilliant.
Please do. I'm really sorry that I've got to go because I was only booked till 9:30, but please, I'm all ears. If you've got feedback, if you've got questions, please do get in touch. It's so important that we work in partnership with farmers on all of these reforms, and it's a really important part of my job to listen to your questions, listen to your feedback and respond to them. So please do email me if you want to keep in touch afterwards. Thanks, everyone.
Janet, thank you very much. Goodbye.
Thanks, bye.
So we'll move on to questions then aimed at our other three speakers. Anonymous attendee, where does he see our, this is to you, John, where does he see our future industry in terms of production in the tree planting targets be achieved? Will there be less production of high quality Scotch land?
So Scotland's a big country, so we've got room for trees and for sheep. And I think that the important thing for us is to move past the narrative that it's one or the other. And we've been doing some really good work with our forestry colleagues, and they in turn have been doing work on the ground to really spread that that sense that trees on farms can be good for both the livestock that are using the land and also for carbon sequestration. And I think what's important is that that there will be a need to plant plantation forestry, which is seen as hostile to the livestock sector and traditionally has been, and in particular many see it as threatening to the tenanted sector. And we are specifically taking steps to address that. And I know that that's a well-founded fear for some tenants who see those bits of land as being lost to agriculture because they're taken in hand and planted. So we know that that's an issue, and we're working with our forestry colleagues to see how that we can address that. Because one of the key things as we move to net zero is making sure that local communities benefit from the opportunities that come from these sorts of capital investment programs to restore peatland or to plant trees. And those of you that are involved in managing that land currently in sheep production should be able to benefit from that. And that might provide you with a different revenue stream, but it's important that we get that right with the different forms of land tenure that we have in Scotland, which is a complex and contentious area. So I'm not shying away from the fact that there's a potential for conflict there, because I know that there has been, and in some instances there is. But there is room for both sets of activity. And I think if we view it in that way, then the two things needn't be in tension. And there'll also be a requirement to plant more communities type woodland, riparian buffer strip type woodland. So the sorts of trees on farms that are beneficial to your agricultural business that aren't plantation forestry. And there's some really big win-wins in that for us if we start to embrace that as an approach to managing the land for multiple benefits at the same time. And it's perfectly possible to do that whilst improving the management of the sheep flock that might be currently occupying the land. So perhaps I'll leave it there because I could talk for hours on that subject.
Thank you. A question from Neil Orton. If I direct this at you, please, James. Will there be recognition within these schemes to value the permanent pastures for carbon capture, which are many times more than of trees, as well as its role in providing wholesome food with minimal carbon footprint and low food miles?
Yeah, so in our proposals, absolutely. So we think nutrient management and soil management is absolutely critical. We think for a number of reasons, not least to give farmers an ability to continue to produce food, produce sustainably, but also for exactly those same reasons. Capturing organic matter and carbon in soil is a fundamental part of our proposals, and the action that farmers can take can really help there. And we believe government should reward farmers for the action that they take in helping us to achieve those targets. So from a Welsh perspective, absolutely.
Okay. Here's an interesting one. Should the links be rewilded? How are sheep farmers supposed to protect their livestock? We already have many issues with sea eagles, badgers, foxes, ravens, supposedly dogs. When can we see the end of proposals like this in Scotland? But I mean, this is something that's going on across the country. It's not a Scottish thing particularly, but I guess rewilding is something we've got to expect a bit of. Would you like to comment on that, John?
So if I was Mr. Ewing, I might say over my dead body, but I'm not the minister, so I won't speak for him. I shouldn't say that. It was a bit too flippant, but Mr. Ewing's not very keen on rewilding and in general, and links in particular. But I think we have to recognise that there are large land owners in Scotland who are entitled to use their land, provided they're acting within the law in ways that they see fit. And some of those, like Mr. Paulson, have been keen on rewilding the land. Introduction of new species to our countryside, even if they were previously native, is not something that can just be undertaken by any private citizen. So that where we introduced beavers, that was done in a controlled way in parts of Scotland, and in other parts of Scotland it was done in a less controlled way. So I know that Nature Scotland colleagues are think about these issues very carefully, and I know that there are tensions in terms of sea eagles and predation of sheep, and again that's a Nature Scotland thing. So I believe that there will be more rewilding, because I think that some people in Scotland who own the land will be interested in doing that. It's not particularly a focus for my part of government in terms of agriculture and land use change, though Nature Scotland do have responsibility for ensuring that we restore and promote wildlife and nature in general, and some of that has to do with increasing the range of species that are under threat globally, so Scotland can play host to some of those species. So it's a bit of a complex area, but certainly our current agriculture minister is very keen to ensure that the interests of the livestock sector, particularly the sheep sector, are taken into account strongly in that process.
Thank you very much. Ian, I just wondered if you comment. It's not something I hear a lot of rewilding in Northern Ireland. Is it an issue you have there?
Not something that tends to come up in the topic of conversation very much over here, I suppose, given the nature of our land types, and scale of our farming enterprises here. So we don't tend to have those large sort of areas of, I suppose, estates maybe that you see described there in the Scottish context. But certainly, it's not something that I envisage being, a key part of the conversation. It's more about how do we prevent land abandonment, probably as a bigger issue over here, certainly particularly in our more, I suppose, disadvantaged land area types. I don't know if rewilding will be a feature of that, but I suspect there'll be more of an issue in terms of those upland areas. How can we reward farmers for things like, storing carbon and sequestering carbon? I suspect that'll be probably more of a key focus in those those more marginal land types than rewilding, I would suspect.
Thank you, Ian. John keeps coming up with the replanting of trees. I think this is much my question, is how much of these trees are going to be native and how much are forestry? Is there going to be an attempt to put it as much as possible back into what would have been traditional native woodland?
So I think it will be both. Certainly the investment that comes from private finance will be looking for a return. So some of that will definitely be for lumber and other forestry products. And it's important. One of the key things that we're looking to do is ensure that that inward investment comes to Scotland. We've already talked earlier about the potential for the agricultural support budget to be getting smaller. So having private finance coming into rural Scotland would be a very welcome thing, but that also comes with commercial forestry interests. But as I said, there will also be a need to put in forestry for communities as well. And in some places it's inappropriate to put commercial forestry in, but there's still an opportunity to get trees into the land for the purposes of capturing carbon and also for serving communities. So it will be a mixture. And the balance of those things will be something that we'll be looking closely at as our forestry planting targets increase. So perhaps I'll leave it. It's really for forestry colleagues to answer detailed questions like that. But
yeah, appreciate that. And James, just the same in Wales, really. That would apply. Would that be correct?
Yeah. So in Wales we have a national forest programme which is looking to create a quite a diverse and blended approach to forestry in Wales generally, and that includes forestry in urban and peri-urban spaces, as well as supporting sustainable timber production in Wales, and also thinking about the benefits of tree planting on agricultural land as well. We already have a number of schemes in Wales that support tree planting, which we've supported for a number of years through the Common Agricultural Policy. Our future proposals would also encourage that as well. But I think for me it goes back to, in terms of land use and agriculture, it's this land sharing approach that we're trying to adopt here. So looking at tree planting alongside food production as opposed to replacing it, and looking at the benefits that it provides, not just in terms of the social benefits. Clean air, particularly around trees, is a big issue in Wales when you think about ammonia release as well. But also carbon sequestration. But for us, the opportunities for things like agroforestry we think are sufficient, some significant as well, and opportunities to diversify income streams for farmers potentially. So yeah, a real blended approach for us.
Thank you very much. I think we'll wrap it up there. I think there was the opportunity, as we said before, to put questions forward to you and that you could answer later on, but just to say that really thank you very much for everybody, for the speakers today: Ian Stevenson, John Kerr, James Owen and Janet Hughes, who's left us of course now. But thank you very much indeed, and thank you to all the attendees for joining us as well, and the questions that have come forward. So just a reminder that there'll be another webinar next week. It's as a Shepherd's Overseas Adventure, a morning report from 2 NSA travel bursary recipients. So that's same time next week. So just again, thank you very much to our speakers, and thank you very much to all our attendees. Hope to see you all again soon. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.